Planning and Zoning Commission is an independent advisory body of the City of Ames City Council. The Planning and Zoning Commission members are volunteers of the community and not part of the city administration. The Planning and Zoning Commission is supported by staff from the city's planning division. The commission is responsible for recommendations on matters involving subdivisions, annexations, master plans, and major site development plans, amendments to the zoning ordinance, and comprehensive plan amendments. We make our recommendations based on city codes, the facts presented, and input from the public. As an advisory commission, we welcome all comments regarding the proposed item. Please direct your input to the commission. If the proceedings become lengthy, we may ask that the comments be focused on new information not previously presented. You may speak only once on an agenda item. If you wish to speak, please fill out a speaker information card and present it to the recording secretary. We ask that you come to the microphone to speak so that all comments may be recorded. The order of the proceeding for each item on the agenda will be as follows. City staff will present the staff report regarding the agenda item. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of city staff. The applicant will be invited to make a statement regarding the request. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant. Members of the audience will be invited to come forward to offer comments and questions. Once public comment is closed, city staff and the applicant will have an opportunity for concluding remarks. The commission will discuss the application based on all presentations and any comments given and come to a recommendation for city council. The discussion may include further questions of city staff and the applicant for clarification. With that, we will move on to the first item on the agenda, which is introduction of the commission members.
Julie Winter.
Mike Clayton.
Mike Sullivan.
John Emery.
Matthew Voss.
Jim Blickensdorf.
Mike LaPetra.
All right. And so the next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. So do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of September 6, 2023. I have a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. And now we have the public forum. Is there anyone from the public that would like to come up and discuss an item that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on from that. Close the public forum and move on to item 6, zoning text amendment for vehicle charging equipment landscape exception.
Good evening. So I'm going to review this one with you tonight. So we are looking at an update to the recently adopted standards for vehicle charging equipment. As we describe in the report, we had an existing facility, Ames Ford, that looked at installing a large number of chargers. They happened to be an older developed site. They ended up looking at having to remove some of their display area to make up for the location of the equipment that was going in for the charging facilities. Overall, that seemed like a little bit of a discouragement on existing developed sites to require that. And City Council initiated this text amendment at the request of Ames Ford, but it's obviously going to apply to other sites. So for the most part, it would affect existing developed sites to make it clear that essentially this minor exception to a numerical standard relating to landscaping would be allowed. Like in the Ames Ford situation, we're talking about roughly 375 square feet on a greater than 5-acre site. So you can see the degree of this exception was not very much. You would not really discern any change to the main landscaping theme on that site, but numerically it was a deficiency as the zoning ordinance looked at it. So we propose to add this small exception in to allow for those numeric requirements of landscaping to be an exception for these vehicle charger equipment and including the transformer that would support them. And if you remember originally when we adopted this, what we allowed for was if you met the front yard landscaping requirements, you could have an encroachment for the equipment only partially into that front yard setback, or you could place the equipment in existing paved parking spaces and paved areas. So that's intact here. This is just to, again, further the allowance of putting chargers on existing sites in landscaped areas. Is there any questions?
Questions for Kelly?
It's pretty straightforward.
Yep, I agree.
Okay. I guess we'll open it for public comment. Is there anyone from the public that would wish to comment on this? Or seeing none, we'll close the public comment period. Are there any other concluding remarks? No? Okay. Do I have a motion? Or any discussion, I guess?
I motion that we move to approve alternative 1, recommend city council approve the proposed zoning text amendment to accept electric vehicle charging equipment from minimum landscape percentage requirements.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes.
Thanks.
That one. Moving on to item 7 on the agenda, which is zoning text amendment for a reduced affordable housing parking rate.
Good evening. I'm Amelia Schoneman. I'm the new planner with the department, and I'll be presenting this item tonight. So this item is part of the city's affordable housing strategy to develop more affordable units. Parking spaces cost money to provide, right? The costs of paving. They also take up space, so that's less flexibility to develop a site, provide amenities, or just have green space and less impervious surfaces on the site. Right now, outside of a planned unit development, the city typically requires 1 parking space per bedroom for 2, 3, and 4 bedroom uses. And for one bedroom apartments, there's 1.5 spaces required. So if you have a baseline of what we're going to, that's the rate that we currently apply to all units, whether they're affordable or market rate. So staff performed counts at peak usage hours at our affordable housing developments in Ames and determined that of the provided parking, they were using 35 to 47% of the spaces. So our apartment rates that apply to market rate units are much higher than is required of these affordable housing developments. We also looked at peer communities and determined that their rates for affordable housing were generally 1 space per unit and no more than 1.5 for units with multiple bedrooms. So the amendment that you're considering tonight would be targeting developments that provide housing for households that have an annual income of 60% of the area median income. That level is typically what we would see targeted with the low income housing tax credit developments that are the main driver of the affordable housing development in Ames. And typically above 60% of the area median income, you can afford market rate housing as well. So for units, and only the units targeting that income level, and if your development has 40% or more of its units restricted to that level, the ordinance would allow us to reduce the parking rate to 1.5 spaces per unit. So that's not different for different sizes of bedrooms. It's just 1.5 across the board per unit. This would also require an agreement where the units would be required to be restricted to that income level and required to be restricted to that income level for a period of 30 years. So we lock in that affordability period. We also, because that rate is higher than we observed was necessary in a lot of the cases, with the affordable housing developments in Ames, we did provide another option to go to city council. If you are within a quarter mile of public transit, you can request a rate down to 1 space per unit. And then if you're providing a greater level of affordability, say 30% AMI housing, so targeting households that are 30% of our area median income, you can also go to city council and request a lower rate. We did not define a floor for that rate. City council would be able to assess that on a case-by-case basis, taking in the context, the location, the developer experience. And that would also require an agreement that would have that 30-year affordability period. At the end of the 30 years, we would not require additional parking to be provided should the units be converted to market rate units. And with that, our recommendation is alternative one, which is approval as I've presented. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Why just 30 years? Why not longer?
30 years is typically the affordability period required under that low-income housing tax credit program that most of our developments utilize. So that's the time frame we selected.
And are we proposing then with this affordability period within the zoning realm that this is going to be the agreement for the affordability period of 30 years as part of the zoning or part of the parking, or?
Yes, so they would need to provide an agreement that states they will be providing those units income restricted for a 30-year period for us to grant the reduction.
What happens if they want to bulldoze the building after 25 years and build something else?
I guess the units don't exist then, so they'd have to comply with the new parking rates.
Okay, I
for
thought
that.
maybe there'd be a
Yeah.
penalty under the agreement that they had for the low-income housing to begin with.
The original funder would probably have a problem with that.
Yeah,
But
I
from
would
a
think so.
parking
Yeah.
perspective, we would
Okay.
not care.
Are there any density requirements or requirements that the projects are built near transit?
No, just the additional reduction option that if you are nearer to transit within a quarter mile, you can have an additional reduction down to 1 space per unit.
In that case, is transit just defined as close to like a Cyride stop? Or,
Yes.
okay.
Yep.
I guess I hadn't seen this affordability period requirement when I looked at the resources earlier. That seems pretty extreme. I definitely understand that low-income housing tax credit has that requirement, but it also states that, and I guess from my experience too, there are other resources that don't have a 30-year affordability. So is that putting an unnecessary burden on
Sure.
developers?
So I think some of the other resources that might be utilized are home funds, which the city actually administers. So we would require an affordability period anyway as the
On top of
administrator.
home? On,
We can define whatever we want. We have to meet the minimum of the home program, which might be less than 30. But our opinion right now, like with the Baker subdivision, is 30 years is the starting point of the conversation.
wow.
So what I would say, it might be different if you're talking about an owner occupied home, but this doesn't apply to that. So we do have, if we do home buyer assistance, you might get a 10 to 15 year commitment for you to have a forgivable loan over that time period and then have resale restrictions, but this doesn't apply to that. This is rental only. So if you're developing the project, it's a pretty substantial capital investment. We're looking at that as having an extended life. This isn't if we give rent assistance to one tenant, you designate a couple of units to be used for project-based vouchers and Section 8 program. That's not this.
Okay.
This is really about a larger project, or it doesn't have to be large, a project that's
Right.
going to be committing to something over the long term.
No, I guess I'm just getting into the weeds as far as this affordability period, but there are CDBG funds and lots of other things that have sometimes only a 5-year period of affordability. But I know that developers are pretty anxious to get in and build. So if the city wants that as I guess it's not related to land. This is not necessarily related to the zoning concern. So I can drop that.
Yeah, I think those things would not yield this product being created on their own. They're going to need some other funding stream that's going to have greater strings attached to it. CDBG
Right.
putting in a street's not going to get this project to exist.
Right.
I just want to add one comment, I guess. Maybe it's something staff can respond to, but I come from Bloomington, Indiana, which is similar to Ames in some ways, but really very dissimilar in other ways. We have concentrations of student housing, or had concentrations of student housing where 0.5 seemed to work out really, really well. Of course, it were downtown and adjacent to campus, and transit was an option. And it just seems that that 1.5 bedrooms in Ames or 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit seems high, and maybe one parking space per unit and even 1.5 per two, like just reducing this table or proposal by half a parking unit would enhance the goal of affordability. And I think the market would drive people to build these units close to transit and other options so that you wouldn't have somebody who's on an island and isolated without resources. And generally, I think, and you cited in your packet, that research generally shows that people only have access to one car. So to provide even that extra half space for an efficiency seems like a waste of valuable land.
Sure, I think that would be alternative two. And staff did look at providing one space per one bedroom unit and 1.5 spaces for 2, 3, or one space for 1 and 2 bedrooms. I have to look at the staff report, sorry, to confirm that. And we determined it would be within the observed rates and utilization at the developments in Ames. I think the 1.5 again matches what the state is currently requiring for the LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits developments, and it matches, we have a reduction for planned unit developments that include affordable housing, and that goes down to 1.5. So because of consistency with those other factors, that's why we picked 1.5, but certainly an option where you could reduce it to one space for a 1-bedroom unit. And
Could you get more restrictive and still allow developers to qualify for the incentives and credits that they need through the state?
I don't think we'd be more restrictive. It'd be more permissive. With the comment you made, if we lowered it,
Depending
we're
on how you
being
look
more
at it.
permissive than state. And to be fair, that the state's a moving target. The 1.5 was something that was probably in their administrative thoughts, but not in their expressly stated rules until this year, because I think they didn't like getting into the conversations of how little parking can I provide. So, but prior to the last round of LIHTC, that was not in the QAP, the program rules. So they still applied it. They just didn't state it that way. So maybe there are ways to lower it below the 1.5. It was just a starting point for consistency. And then if it didn't have LIHTC funding, if it was straight home money or city money only, the home funds do not have a parking requirement tied to that. That's the city's choice or the state's choice of what to fund. I think we had in the report, if you kind of look at, the percentage reduction, the major reduction, as you said, is really at the high bedroom count level. It's not at the low bedroom count. So it is definitely set up to benefit those larger units rather than the smaller units. And I guess that's why we're here. That's one of those questions of, is this the right approach? Is it the right number? Does it match expectations?
I'm curious with respect to the exception for, or possible exception for being close to public transit. Do you have any idea how much of Ames that within a quarter of a mile of public transit, how much of Ames that would cover?
certainly all of the affordable housing developments that we did utilization counts at are within that quarter mile distance. I can't comment on the city as a whole.
We could create that. We don't have that tonight. That would not be hard to create. So when we go forward to city council, that's something that we can easily add. So it's more understandable what that means.
Yeah, I'd be curious because
I
I
think
mean, I
most-
imagine
most
a
of Ames
lot
is
of Ames
pretty
would.
close.
Yeah.
At least where the multifamily zoning is, I'm going to agree. The majority of those areas are within a quarter mile. The single family areas are not this. They're the ones that are not going to have that transit access. And just to be clear, like in that wording, we're just like with the electric vehicle chargers, we don't want like 2 square feet to be the reason you don't do something. So the way that's worded is it's a quarter of a mile approximately. So if the bus stop is in the middle of the block and the measurements to the corner of the block, that last 100 feet is not going to stop us from granting that reduction. So just to be clear, that's why we have the word approximately in for the quarter mile. Bus stops move too. So just wanted to have some flexibility to make sure you're at least getting to that route on the line for that measurement.
feel like I'm definitely in support of, reducing the number of parking spaces required. It seems like a good way to go. I feel like it's been studied pretty well as far as the utilization rate. I feel like that's reassuring to know that we are probably over prescribing parking and we might be able to fit. I think, Jim, you mentioned just fitting with infill development or any other type of things. Just don't overbuild it.
I disagree with Jim on the parking rate. I think 1.5 is for a basement is quite adequate. Anything below that could put additional stress on surrounding neighborhoods in case there's more cars. And then also, I have a little bit of a problem with just 30 years. 30 years in an age of a building is not law. I think it should be extended out to 50. If they want to bulldoze down the building and start over again, that's fine. But we want affordable housing, and by requiring it out to 50 years, I think it'll help protect it.
I guess the only other thought would be, obviously we think of affordable housing, we think a lot of students and things like that. Did you see the same utilization rates when you talked about like senior housing, affordable housing? That would be one area where we definitely don't want to have somebody walking a long way.
So I believe that senior housing, independent living facilities are already at a rate of 1 space per unit.
Okay.
Is that correct, Kelly?
Yeah. So if you meet the definition of an age-restricted housing complex, then yeah, it's only 1 space for that type of unit,
Okay.
regardless of affordability.
And most of those places have their own transport, and all of them that I know of are pretty darn close to bus stops.
We're not, yeah, the senior one, I think in practice, there's a great difference in the affluency of the senior product. So the assumption of 1 car for 2 elderly people as a couple doesn't necessarily hold depending on the affluency level of that unit. That's what we've seen with the projects that have been built in the city. So 1's the standard, might not work universally, but that's what we do. So, and then if they make bigger units, then you start to wonder why it's 1 parking space again, because the assumption obviously was 1 and 2 bedroom units for seniors, and then they make 2s and 3s and have other people living with them that meet federal law, and it's kind of a different story. But we're not really here about senior housing.
Well, any other questions for staff? No? Okay. Well, formality, we'll open the public comment period. Are there any comments from the public? Hearing none. Is there any other discussion?
Yeah, I have 2 other comments.
Yeah.
First, I support the idea of longer than 30 years in principle. I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't know how it makes financial sense for developers, but I do think it makes sense to get a longer commitment on those types of things. Second comment is I wonder if after reviewing the data and discussion, there would be support for reducing the parking for 1 and 2 bedrooms by 0.5. So to park a 1-bedroom unit at 1 and a 2-bedroom unit at 1 space, 1.5 spaces, and then keep 3 and 4 as suggested by staff, which might alleviate some concerns about overflow into adjacent neighborhoods. I think that generally, if I heard staff correctly, you want to incentivize development of multifamily affordable housing. So reducing parking for 1 and 2 bedrooms might enhance that goal also.
Jim, I don't know that I quite caught the proposed rates there. I heard efficiency in 1 bedroom at a half space per unit.
No, 1 unit. So a efficiency or single dwelling, 1 unit, two bedrooms, 1.5. And
One
3,
space and 1.5 spaces.
yes,
Yes.
yes. And then 3 and 4 add 3 spaces and 4 spaces as suggested here.
That's not our proposal.
I'm sorry. I was
That's our current rates.
looking at the wrong table.
Our proposal.
I'm looking at the
is
wrong
what-
table.
Yep,
so
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's where I got confused. So our current,
Yep.
our proposal is 4, 3s, and 2s go down to 1.5. The 1 bedroom and efficiencies stay at 1.5.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong,
Okay,
wrong
I-
one.
And you can lower it to 1, correct? If it's within a quarter of a mile.
So
And most of the development in Ames is within a quarter of a mile.
yeah, and the distinction there is the way the ordinance is drafted right now. You have staff approval at one level, or you can ask for additional relief and go to city council,
Right.
where the 1 can come into play. Staff can't grant that. City council would have to judge that one. The way it's drafted right now, I think city council is trying to. They're going to have to review this before we finalize it, but I think they're trying to empower staff to be able to make things work that are workable. But clearly, sometimes discretion has to be exercised, and that means it's going to have to go through a public hearing process or at least a review with city council. And that's why we propose the TOD or the lower affordability level options to be able to go to city council.
Yeah, because I kind of agree with the one space for 1 or 2 bedroom unit.
What,
You're a little far from the mic. I didn't hear that one
I
either.
said I kind of agree with Jim on
On-
number of spaces per unit.
So then, can you restate what you were saying? Were you saying drop the 1 and 2 bedroom by a half a space?
Yes, reduce
Okay.
1 and 2 bedrooms by half, keep 3 and 4 at the staff recommendation.
Okay, that I understand now.
again, I disagree with that. You have to look forward to when it turns over out of affordable housing. If it chooses that, if the developer chooses that, then it stays down to 1 parking space. It's locked into whatever is
Right.
agreed. So if it ages out of it, then we're stuck. So 1.5 is, as a basement, I think is a very viable limit.
I think at the end of the 30-year period, you've got, a 30-year-old apartment complex. And so those rates probably aren't going to be as high. The rents aren't going to be as high as a new construction.
We hope.
Yep. And so there might be a level of affordability built in just given the age.
That's not what I was trying to point out. I'm saying that after that time period, then they can decide that, okay, it's not affordable housing anymore. We can
Mhm.
move more people in. It can, there's limits on affordable housing. If I understand what staff is saying.
I don't think
The
it's.
numbers of people in a,
I don't think that's what we're basing this on. There's really no limit on the number of people in an affordable housing unit other than the same standards that apply to any other apartment in terms of the amount of adults that occupy an apartment. The more people in the household, actually, the higher the income level is. So your kids count towards
I was
that. Yeah.
referring to adults.
Yeah.
I
So
get-
there's
I understand that there might be 10 kids.
Yeah, so there's no difference between a market rate unit and an affordable unit and how many adults are allowed to live there, whether it's during the 30-year compliance period or after. I think what I'm hearing in that discussion is just the occupant at a different income level after 30 years, meaning they have enough
Yes.
affluence to maybe own 2 cars as a 2-adult household instead of a 1 car. That's the balance that you have to strike here. Yes.
Right. And that's what I'm getting at is we got to look forward to when the affordable housing restriction runs out, then You know, like I said, they could be better off financially, and they could have two cars, and then you run into the problem of overflow into the surrounding community.
I guess maybe one thing to add to try to get to this is for low-income housing tax credits, when, let's say they're building 30 units on a project, not all of those units, some will be market rate and some will be low income. Is that?
It depends. So in our project, I believe it's 100% affordable with no market rate units. But that was, I believe, at our direction
Okay.
because we have money in the project. Yeah, well, obviously it's our land. But if there's two different LIHTC programs. There's a 9% credit, which is competitive, and there's a 4% credit, which is not competitive, meaning if you meet the standards and there's funding available, you get it, versus the 9%, you got to win a contest to get the money. In the 4% or even in the 9%, our conversations with affordable housing developers, the most advantageous version of LIHTC is to do what they call income averaging, which is to have a mix of higher income people that meet the definitions of LIHTC and then subsidize a few lower income units at a greater subsidy. So that's called income averaging. And they can, technically in LIHTC, they can have market units. They just don't get the tax credits on the market-based units. So there's a lot that goes into evaluating a LIHTC project. And every 2 years, the standards are adjusted slightly by the state on what is the best mix to make it work. So it's always hard for us to tell you what the next LIHTC project's going to be.
Okay. I guess in Kelly's answer to that, where I was going with that was you may not always be looking at a 30-unit apartment building where every single one of these units, this new regulation applies. You may have a different regulation that applies to every unit, depending on if it's income qualified, which I'm saying basically there won't be as much of a decrease in parking spaces as what we're seeing on paper here if you're not dealing with a 100% affordable housing unit project for 30 years.
I understand that, but you got to look at the smaller units too, where
But that's where it goes back to the market utilization study that they presented, which is that the current number of spaces in affordable housing units are not being utilized based on the prescribed amounts that we're building out to. So, I mean, they did the work and looked at all the affordable housing units of what we're using, what a household of those characteristics are using, and we're not using the parking that we're requiring.
and I understand that. Again, when that affordable housing runs out, then you have to look forward and plan ahead to what might happen. You know, if you lock it in at one, you're locked in at one, no matter what.
Maybe could incentivize using more public transportation or lots of other things that would actually be more advantageous to develop the density of the city over time.
I disagree.
Well, I think that's you kind of just, I'm not able to answer the question, but just to kind of hit on that issue, there's an open question about self-selection into smaller units with less parking. So if you don't build it, do you just get the people that don't own the cars because they don't know where to park them? Versus your concern is, well, I want to be there so much, I don't care if there's parking and I'm going to bring my car and park it somewhere else. It's an unresolved issue in academia about exactly how that works. But there is a decent amount of evidence that people will self-select into the transit-oriented units and have less cars because that's the lifestyle they want, even if they can afford something else. So it's that combination of, again, I don't have the perfect answer for any of the comments. That's the question. What's the balance that the commission wants to recommend to city council? But it's hard to say either way with that 30-year period, what's going to happen.
And none of the three are even at 50% right now. Utilization.
No. I think the highest was 47%.
Yeah.
And I would note that one was Eastwood, which is 100% income restricted units at a lower income, a lower percentage of median income. So it's lower than 60%, which is what we're proposing. But that was the highest utilization rate. So that was interesting.
But it was also the highest utilization rate on a parking supply that was lower than the actual standard.
Yes.
Right. So if you compared it to the standard, it's really low compared to what was built, and it appears high.
Yeah.
So I'd prefer to look at the code requirement than what was provided.
I was just going to ask, so about those other cities communities that you referenced in that table, Fort Collins, Iowa City, Bloomington, some of those rates or minimum parking requirements are lower. I guess, has there been any, like, how are those being handled in those cities, or how has that turned out for them? I guess, have they had issues there? I know it's those are similar cities. That's why you included them, but and they're not entirely similar. But wondering if there's any thoughts on those ones being lower, some of those minimums.
I did not reach out, but I will.
I think you got this sample because most people don't have this rate in their zoning ordinance. It's a one-off process. Typically, it's not prescribed in advance. So you don't have a lot of comparables here because there aren't a lot out there. But if you're getting to John's comment about what happens 30 years from now, these people haven't lived through that 30-year evolution yet. LIHTC's been around for just over 30 years. So you do have people who've dropped out of compliance, especially at the beginning of the program. It didn't last for 30 years. So people do it for 15 and drop out. So you could probably find stuff across the country, but a lot of those are in major metropolitan areas, not even apples to apples with us. So I don't know that we can get an answer for Fort Collins, who I'm going to guess this is a really new standard. Didn't you tell me this was
I
like
think
recently
it's
adopted?
Pretty new.
Yeah, Fort Collins, I know, adopted a new comp plan in the last 5 years, and they've been retooling their whole zoning ordinance as a result. So I don't know that they even have evidence about how this works.
Sure. Okay.
Could maybe add some commentary about Bloomington if you'd like.
Sure.
So in Bloomington, I served as the chair of the parking commission for, I think, 3 years. So parking's something I love. In that town, almost all of the parking problems are around single family housing that have been converted to student housing or to less loved housing, let's say, less desirable housing in streets, in neighborhoods adjacent to the university. In almost all cases, parking at 0.5 has reduced large swaths of asphalt, okay, in developments. And developments continue to be built every year. It is not discouraged at all developers from developing in Bloomington. And people seem to get by just fine. It does direct development along transit routes, and it has encouraged in that community development of 3 and 4 bedroom units by making them affordable, by reducing the costs, but also making the developments just more attractive as you drive by. There are other adjustments that were made about how to locate parking, where to locate parking, but you just don't see any longer large, empty asphalt that could be used for affordable housing.
I understand what you're saying. We've been on opposite sides
We've
of
done
the
this before.
parking ring every single time. And I disagree with your hypothesis too, where
Yeah.
it's, reduced parking, in my view, promotes a problem in the surrounding communities. I've seen it happen. It's and it turns out bad in campus town. You see it happening around football games even. This city is just nuts.
Well, I always
And I
always say
understand, I
special events
understand
don't
about
count, right?
the difference there.
Yeah. So we don't ever look at special events or the
No.
peak issue in the city. We want to look at,
But
75th percentile.
Parking is something that's an evil necessity. And I understand that your philosophy is less parking, the better. But I wholeheartedly disagree with it.
I think for me, just where it comes down with what you've discussed with year requirement. I would agree with what Jim said earlier. With if you were to extend like 30 years out, I just really think that would disincentivize developers from going towards affordable housing. And I don't think that's something we want. So I think 30 years makes sense with the current LIHTC standards.
Hearing a
entertain a
lot,
motion?
hearing a lot of thoughts. Yeah. Does someone have a motion?
Okay, I would make the motion that the commission adopt alternative 2, recommending specifically that 1 unit and 2 units are parked at 1 space per dwelling unit, or sorry, per unit, and that the remainder of the recommendations are intact as staff designed. Does that make sense?
Yes, and just to clarify, so that's what staff can approve on its own, not what city council can approve. So
Right.
staff can approve 1 space for 1 bedroom units and 1.5 spaces for 2, 3, and 4.
Right. No,
Great.
No, what, 1 space for a 2-bedroom unit?
You're just saying the 1 space.
I think you need to restate
Yeah,
the
so
motion.
let's just get some clarity. Staff's recommendation for 1, 2, and 3, 4 bedrooms is what exactly?
1.5 for all of them.
1.5 for all of them. Okay,
I thought you said 1 and 2 bedrooms, 1 space per unit.
1 space per unit.
That's the motion,
So
right?
to lower the
Yes.
maximum parking.
Of the, yep.
So please restate the motion.
Okay, so to adopt option 2,
Mhm.
permitting staff to direct developers to build 1 parking space for a 1-bedroom unit, 1 parking space for a 2-bedroom unit, 1.5 for 3 and 4-bedroom units.
As the minimums,
As a
not,
minimum.
not maximums.
As a minimum.
Minimums, yes. Okay. That is clear to me.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Hey,
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so motion passes.
5-2.
5-2. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So the next item on the agenda is discussion of draft accessory dwelling unit and duplex standards.
Yeah, well, while Eloise is getting ready, I'll just kind of give a quick overview. So you got a PowerPoint and some background information. What we're going through is that PowerPoint tonight. What I have you set up for is it's more than a courtesy review, but just a chance to see kind of a preliminary review of what's going to be likely coming to you as a zoning text amendment in the future. So we just concluded our public outreach process in August and September. You saw that in the PowerPoint. We are going to council next Tuesday. So this gives you a chance to see what's been out there for the public review, to give us any feedback that we can include for the 10th. But formally, you will review this as a zoning text amendment sometime later this fall or early this winter to actually adopt standards. So with that, I'm going to give it over to Eloise and let's walk through ADUs and duplexes.
All right, we'll get started. So you may recall we came to you in May to talk about infill development and the council's directives. And we'll get into some of the timelines further in the presentation. But this is where we're at now after having some direction from council. And tonight for our meeting, we want to talk through the standards that are proposed and have some discussion. We show discussion at the end, but certainly if you have questions as we're going through this, I have no problem with you interrupting and asking your questions. So the council values diverse housing options, and that was clearly supported in the policies adopted for the Ames Plan 2040. And as you look around the city, you see a lot of single-family homes, and you see a lot of high-rise apartments. You don't see much that's in the middle that's being built today because if you have property that's zoned RH, you want to maximize your profits and you're going to go high and lots of units. In the past, some of those middle opportunities were supported in the code. So the question really is, looking forward, how to accommodate more diversity of housing. And as mentioned, the Plan 2040 looked at the count of some of that middle type housing as being part of a projected housing provided in the city by 2040. So more duplexes and townhomes than what we currently see today. And of course, accessory dwelling units fits in with an alternative housing style that we don't currently have. Because if you wanted to have a one-bedroom apartment, you're not going to find something that's independent and standalone. It's going to be part of another complex. So as mentioned, as we reviewed with you in May, we had a workshop with City Council March 21st, and that was a lot of background about infill and also policies of the Ames Plan 2040 to get direction from them. And then in April, we had a follow-up that focused a lot on limitations and existing covenants. This map to the right shows it maps restrictive covenants within the city, and that was one of our concerns, is that new development that includes HOAs has restrictive covenants in place that will prohibit accessory dwelling units and duplexes within their developments. That's how they've structured the development. So these areas in here would be the areas that would then be the receiving areas for accessory dwelling units and or duplexes as infill. And the same over here where you have the green areas. But the areas that are pink, it's a little hard to see the colors, but I think you can determine where you see the pink over here, and then more on the edge where newer development's occurring. So we wanted to evaluate that, and so we did present that information in April. Then in June, the City Council actually gave direction on draft standards and direction for public outreach. And so that was really important to have those draft standards so that it was a opportunity for people to respond to something concrete. And we could get feedback from them as to if they supported it, if they thought it was too permissive or too restrictive. So what is an accessory dwelling unit? Well, an accessory dwelling unit is a smaller detached dwelling on the same property as a principal residence. According to the proposal that we have going forward, the accessory dwelling cannot be attached to the house. It is an independent structure with independent living facilities, meaning it has kitchen, bathroom, bedroom. It would be required to be on a foundation and have utility connections. So we created a web page with lots of information. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, but lots of information there, including a link to an online survey, an opportunity for comment, draft regulations, frequently asked questions, and the ADU brochure that we provided to you. The city staff has done a great job of getting press releases out and social media postings to help get the word out. There was a city side newsletter article that was in the utility billings that I think really helped for people to understand about it and lead the way into the 5 informational meetings and events where we had a presence and opportunity to speak with people. So some of the basics are that the accessory dwelling unit would use the current accessory building standards as a base. So we're taking some of the existing code that's there now and applying it to the accessory dwelling unit as well. So such things as maximum size, setbacks, height, etc. We would allow 1 bedroom only. We would require 1 parking space, and the owner would be required to reside on the site. The owner can be either in the accessory dwelling unit or in the main structure, but only one of the units may be rented. And if they were to be rented, they would have to have a rental permit for that unit. And with the duplex basics, it would be required to be new construction, so no conversion of existing units. And we've put in place in the proposed regulations some design standards that would look to the context of the area. So even though a developer is doing maybe a certain type of development in the new part of town, that style of development just may not fit with an existing neighborhood. One of those examples is the location of the driveways and the garages, and the amount of garages that face the street. And there again, following current zoning standards, setbacks, coverage, limitations, etc. So accessory dwelling units could be built over a new or an existing garage. And they would be required also, as I said, an independent detached unit. So that's the 2 options for creating an accessory dwelling unit. So some of the obstacles that are in place or impediments to doing an accessory dwelling unit, the greatest one is really the private covenants or the HOAs. So there's a substantial part of the city that would be restricted from, at this time, from building an ADU or a duplex. And people would just need to understand their property isn't available at this time for that purpose. The second biggest stumbling block would be the addition of a parking space. So 1 additional parking space would be required for the accessory dwelling unit, which comes to a total of 3 parking spaces. We require 2 parking spaces for every residential single-family unit. So basically how that comes out is if you have a 2-car garage, then you're all right. But if you have a 1-car garage, as many of the older properties have, it's going to be a little bit challenging to fit an additional parking space. You can have 2 cars in tandem, back to, one in front of the other, but you cannot have 3 in tandem. So that's going to restrict where these can go. The third item that is a spatial consideration it will be an obstacle to many of the smaller properties is that the total of all your accessory buildings cannot exceed 25% of the rear yard. And that's in place today. If you're building a garage or a shed or a gazebo or whatever structures you're building in your rear yard today, the total of those accessory structures cannot exceed 25% of the rear yard. If you have a larger yard, you'll be fine. If you've got a constrained yard, you might already be at that 25%, even with just a 1 stall garage. The property owner must reside on site. And then these on the right are additional items for consideration. The 900 square feet maximum size for the ADU, that comes from the same standard of accessory structures. Right now, you can build a 900 square foot garage or a 900 square foot shed. So we allow that. Not everybody does it just because it's allowed, because also it's that 25% coverage of the rear yard that also is in place. But additionally, what we have included in the proposed regulations is that it's limited to one bedroom. So even though it could be up to 900 square feet, you could do a one bedroom unit that's fairly sizable for anywhere from, 550 square feet would work. So I think the 900 sounds like a lot, but in reality, that is also the gross square footage. So if it were to be built as part of a garage, like on the second floor of a garage, or even attached to a garage, then your ADU would be substantially reduced because you're also adding in the garage area, or if you had a basement, all of that as one structure is 900 square feet. The total coverage of all impervious area, which is a zoning development standard, is that you can't cover more than 60% of your lot area. We were concerned about that being an impediment initially, and we did some analysis of existing properties to see if we had very many that were over that, and we found that we really did not. So we're not thinking that that's going to be an impediment. It's really going to be these ones on the left that are the harder items to comply with just spatially. And then the last thing here is that the ADU standards would, the historic overlay district or the single family conservation overlay district standards would trump any of the ADU standards or duplex. Duplex is already covered. So this is just showing that if you have your principal structure where you can put an accessory structure in your rear yard, it's any of these hatched areas. If you have a street, you have to be back 15 feet. But otherwise, you can go within 3 feet of the property line with an accessory structure. Now, one of the considerations with it being a dwelling unit, although you could go within 3 feet, in order to avoid having to put in a firewall, you would need it to be 5 feet from the property line. And then if it were to be a 2-story structure, it would need to meet the 8-foot setback requirement. So these graphics just show some of that, some of those regulations. They show it graphically so people can better understand how everything relates. There's a 10-foot separation distance for fire code between structures. That this is showing the additional parking space where you've got 2 in tandem, but 1 for the ADU that can, either of these can access the driveway. Here we're showing a 2-car garage, and it's the same thing where that space for the accessory dwelling unit is free to come and go without being obstructed by the other 2. And then in this third example, it's showing an ADU over 2-story garage in this 8-foot separation. On the side yard, the rear yard currently is 3 feet. However, there again with the firewall, it would be a 5-foot separation. And these rules for separation and setback are already in place for accessory structures and garages, as I mentioned. So if you had a 2-car garage today, whether it wouldn't be an accessory dwelling unit today because it's not allowed, but if it was a 2-story garage, it wouldn't be any different from these standards that we're showing for the accessory dwelling unit. So if you do convert your garage for an accessory dwelling unit, you still would be required to provide parking to meet the parking requirements. So the ADU has to be located on a foundation and also has to have utilities serving it. It can't be located on wheels. So the tiny house concept typically is on wheels. That would not be allowed under these regulations. You'd have to put it on the foundation and connect it in. So these are just some graphics showing a floor plan, showing if you had 2 bedrooms, it would not be allowed. Just 1 bedroom. You can have a living area, you can have a deck. And this is a little different floor plan than what was shown previously. So the survey is ongoing. Every time I check, there's more people who filled it out. So we had said it was going to end on October 3rd. When I checked at 5 p.m. today, we're up to 181 respondents. 75% of the survey respondents are familiar with the concept of an accessory dwelling unit, and 41% of the survey respondents indicate some interest in building within the next 3 years, building an ADU. And we will provide complete results when we come back next time to you and when the survey is closed.
That'll be part of the council report next week. So that's part of that public feedback for them.
So talking about duplexes, back in the 80s and 90s, there were duplexes that were constructed in low-density residential areas around town. But when the zoning was changed in 2000, it was eliminated as something that could be built as for new construction. So I live in one of those older duplexes. So those are considered pre-existing and non-conforming, but you couldn't build one today without this being adopted. You could build it, but you would have to build it in the right zoning district. And as I said, if it's a RH zoning district, you're going to build something bigger and more intense for density. So the proposal is including design requirements, design standards to try to have these units fit within the context of the what we call a block face. So a duplex is a building located on a lot that includes 2 independent living units attached together. We are proposing them as new construction only, meaning you have to have a vacant lot to build them. You can't do a conversion of an existing house. The design standards focus on roof type, building orientation, and garages. And garage and driveway pattern of the block is to be considered. So we use that term pattern a lot. And what we mean by that is you look at the existing to determine if the existing block face has front-loaded garages, like in this top photo, or whether it's a detached garage or a rear-loaded garage, or maybe even no garage. But the front facade, in this case, has no garage. So those are the 2 patterns that we see in these established neighborhoods. And what you don't see is you don't see the pattern that is being used as much today, where the garage protrudes from the house substantially. In this case, the garage is pretty flush with the facade of the house. So here's an example of a garage that's fairly flush with the house. It's front loaded. And then this would be an example of a duplex that could be built that would fit the design of this area. The garage that's shown is a one-car garage, so it doesn't overwhelm the front facade. Here's an example of a detached garage toward the back of the property, and an example of a duplex with you can't see the detached garage behind, but you can see the sidewalk. I mean, you can see the driveway on the side of the building, just like in this case. So it's an application of the same pattern that's found in the neighborhood. This is an example of what's called rear loaded, where there's an alley and a garage that's accessed from the alley. So this pattern in the single family neighborhood then is replicated with the duplex by observing the same pattern. And these are just some more examples of units that would blend in well with ranch style homes, etc. But there again, one is front loaded with the one car garage, and the one to the right has the detached garage behind. And this is based on an existing vacant lot that previously had a duplex. So these graphics would actually, you could see the size of the one on the left and the right is the same dimension. So it shows that it could in fact be accommodated in real life, and it's not just a pretty picture that's not realistic. This is the same 2 units, but with the floor plan shown. And so the timeline is we're doing public outreach across the city in August, September. We had online resources, 5 in-person opportunities to talk with the public. And we will be returning to the city council next week on Tuesday. And we will be providing them with a summation of what the public outreach efforts were and what kind of results we received. And we will be asking council to give direction on how they wish to have us proceed with potentially having adoption by the end of the year. So tonight we're showing you these draft standards, and then after council gives us direction, we will come back with any proposed ordinances for you to make an official recommendation to the city council. But we would like to hear from you, hear what your concerns are, what you support, if you have any comments or recommendations at this time.
Comments really at this time yet, but you said that there were 181 inquiries so far?
Yes,
That's
there were
encouraging.
181 survey results as of 5 o'clock tonight. And that was the ADU. The duplex survey,
Mhm.
there's much less, but those were about 41.
Unfortunately, the physical in-person choices had very low participation. We tried to hold 4 across the city, so they weren't all in one place, and we had very few people come out. We did find out that people came to whatever meeting date worked versus no matter whether it was on the other side of town from where they lived or not, for the most part. So we didn't really gain participation to going to the west side of the city or the south side of the city. We kind of tried to ask people why they were there. So that wasn't great. Online tools seems to be picking up with more publicity at the end. And so that's helpful.
And we found that the people that did come out to the open houses generally were coming because they were interested in accessory dwelling units. They were supportive. People who were not supportive, we've had quite a mix on the surveys. So we see lots of support, but we also see lots of opposition. So it's actually fairly balanced between the two as to the number of people who want it and who don't want it.
So the purpose of the ADUs in the city's eyes is not as a, per se, it's a granny unit, but as a rental unit?
It can be whatever
Yeah.
works for the people.
I understand, but it's for an infill.
It's just another choice of adding a unit to property that already has a single family home, regardless of how you want to use it, family member or otherwise.
So there will be no restrictions on ADUs for what it can be used for
The only thing that sort of controls that is that the owner of the property must reside on site. So it can't be an absentee landlord or a property management company that's having 2 units. The owner must live there, either in the small unit or the big unit, and then they can do whatever they want with the other one.
so they can build it, but then if they move out of the house, they got to close down the ADU.
You will not be able to get a letter of compliance on a property without the owner residing on it. So we don't really have a way to enforce you purposely living there. We can just limit you from having it be a rental unit. That's really our stick.
What?
We can only really limit it on being a licensed rental unit. That's really our stick for compliance.
So
We
there's
can't.
no-
So you don't have to
There's no
necessarily
stick.
live there. You just can't rent out both units. That's what you're
Correct.
saying.
You won't be able to rent both units.
Yeah.
That's what the limitation really is. But if the owner doesn't live there.
Right.
If the owner lives in one, they can license one. And if the other one is also licensed, that can happen too. The owner just must live there. That's the key point. You can't get a building permit to build it unless it's to the owner of the property.
So if the renter, if the owner moves off the property,
It cannot be licensed for rental.
Okay.
As 2 units, right?
I just thought the ADU thing was going to be for granny units, but I'm not speaking.
It can. It's
Yeah,
just-
I
it can
understand
be-
that
yeah.
it can.
Yeah, it can be either. There's no distinguishing standards.
Well, one of the great things about accessory dwelling units is the flexibility. So maybe you build it initially for a family member, but then over time, that family member doesn't need it anymore. And so then you may have a period where you decide you are okay being a landlord and having it rented. And then maybe a few years later, you're ready to use it for a family member again. Or maybe you decide you're going to be that family member to live in it and rent out the bigger unit.
And the 900 square feet is including if there's a basement.
Right. If you have a basement, that would be included in the 900.
900 square feet is a pretty big place too. I know I lived in one that
Yeah.
was less than 900.
You'll be interested if you look at the public comments next week they get to council, you'll see both sides of that where 900 is not nearly enough and 900 is a lot. You get a lot of
But
different.
like I said, I lived in
Yep.
854 square feet when the first house I bought.
Yep. So
Which neither here nor there.
One comment about duplexes, do you need to change to the number of non-related adults that can live in a structure then? Or is each side of the duplex considered a separate unit?
Each side is separate.
they're licensed independently. So you obtain a letter of compliance for each unit that you're renting.
And for duplexes, owners don't have to be on site.
Correct. Both units can be rented.
Are 0 lot lines in your zoning ordinance to allow building? Okay.
There's 2 main zones for single family: RL, which is pre-2000, and then there's after 2000, which is FSRL. FSRL has single family attached as a choice across that zoning district already. RL does not.
So they'll in some places they'll have to get rezoned.
No. She's asked about a building type that is neither a duplex nor an ADU. It's 2 individual units, and they're on their own lot, but they're attached. It's
Like a
not really
townhouse.
part. It's not really part of
So an ADU would be an exception to a single family dwelling.
it's an accessory dwelling to a single family dwelling. Must be detached, can't be attached, and it can't be within that existing home.
So it's an exception to being zoned for, I can't remember.
We don't actually use that terminology. It's just low density. We don't use a single family zoning district nomenclature.
So it's just an accessory building that goes with a single family home.
And it's right now actually prohibited to have a second dwelling on your property. So that's the change that would happen with the zoning code, is that that would be eliminated. So it's no longer prohibited.
So I'm a big proponent of infill and also allowing people to manage their property in line with their own wishes, as finding ways to do that. I guess I think this is a very well thought out approach, and I think it's obvious there's been a lot of work put into it. I just had a few questions. So, and maybe I missed this, but so what if you're allowing 900 square feet, why is it limited to one bedroom? What's the reasoning behind that? I guess because you could probably fit more than one under 900 square feet, right?
I think we're trying to balance the occupancy concern about how many more people are going to be on the property. So with one bedroom, if you apply the rental code, technically 3 adults can live in that structure. It's the same with 2 bedrooms. But I think we're just trying to again mitigate the concern about concentration and over just the amount of people that are on the site. That's what it's really coming from.
Okay.
If you did do more than one bedroom, it would change the parking too, wouldn't it?
Well, we haven't written that standard, so I don't know that it would. I mean, we require 2 parking spaces for a house regardless of the number of bedrooms. So I don't know if we had more bedrooms in ADUs, would we require more parking? I'm going to guess not. Based on the feedback, that's probably the number one issue you get comments on is don't require any parking. It's not enough parking. So if you want to
Finding a
build one,
balance.
you think the parking requirement's an impediment. If you don't like them, you're saying let's have more parking. So if we allow more bedrooms, my guess is we would not require more parking.
Okay. And could you speak, I guess maybe I just don't understand. So the 60% impervious area, less than that, what's the reasoning behind that, or what's the purpose of that, I guess?
That's the current zoning development standard right now with all of the residential areas, that you don't have more than 60% coverage on your lot. It keeps opportunity for infiltration of water.
Yep.
And so forth.
It's just a bulk control that the city uses. It's
Yeah.
the main bulk control in terms of coverage is just the way to do it.
Okay. Then the comment in there, but no minimum unit size. You speak to that, I guess, is that
No minimum lot size.
no minimum unit size for the
Oh,
accessory
no
dwelling
minimum
unit.
unit size. That's correct. Yes. There is not a minimum.
But there'll be a practical minimum, right? For whatever,
Well,
a
and-
bedroom is allowed a certain size and a bathroom and a kitchen.
Yeah, they're pretty
Right.
small. So there's the zoning definitions, but then there's also gonna be the building code would apply.
Right.
So
So it would be the
have-
building code requirements that would apply.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you'll
that
have to
makes
get to
sense.
those minimum numbers to be considered a living unit.
Okay. And then my last question. So the accessory dwelling units, and I don't know, maybe this has been discussed in the past, but are those something that could be rented out like on Airbnb or something like that? Is that something that's allowed under
Yes.
the
Yes.
current regulatory environment?
Our rental allows either short-term or long-term right now. So you get a rental permit and you can do either short or long-term.
Okay. And so nothing with that would change
Right.
with this change.
And we're limited on what we can restrict with that, given some of the state
Right.
rules.
Okay. Those are the questions I had.
I have some questions as well. So one thing I know that goes hand in hand with a lot of like ADUs, and you see a lot of cute Netflix shows or anything else about how people are doing tiny houses and doing these really cute, architecturally savvy kinds of things, which I think are awesome. You also start to get into the idea of shipping containers and things like that. And then it comes to mind, especially maybe Ames wouldn't have this problem, but in a lot of small towns, trailers and other units that those types of materials are really, really subject to weathering. So I'm wondering if there's been any discussion about requiring certain exterior building materials or excluding certain materials. And then maybe if I know we had a recent discussion and I think they maybe approved there was a property maintenance standard that was being considered. I wonder if that would apply to this, because I think on its face, I wouldn't want to necessarily exclude some of those cool ideas, but it is true that some of those things might not age as well. So the city having some guardrails in place on how you can enforce that. Just curious if there's been any talk about that. And then the second thing was I noticed that it just said the structure had to have a foundation, so you aren't allowing something on wheels. That should probably be more defined. Just thinking a lot of times we see permanent foundation in codes. And I'm also thinking it said it had to have a foundation and then it had to be connected to utilities. And that could be a recipe for disaster if you have those utility lines that aren't weatherized at all. So just curious if there's been any.
So that'll absolutely be covered by building code.
Okay.
You cannot use a trailer. This
Okay.
has to be a building, not a trailer you set on a skirted stand like a mobile home.
That's what I was
Mobile
worried
homes
about.
do not
Okay.
meet this expectation.
Okay.
So
So it's
just to-
covered
all
in
of that
the
stuff-
universal building code.
Yep.
Okay.
You will
Okay.
build it. It could be pre-constructed, but essentially it's either a pre-manufactured structure or it's a stick-built structure. A trailer is not this.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that all of those little versions of that won't be
That's
allowed.
huge. Okay. That's great. That's great.
The property maintenance code, yes, it applies to all structures on a property,
Okay. Great. So
accessory or
we
primary.
some teeth for that then. Okay.
The first part of that, though, is there any aesthetic requirements? At this point in time, there are 0 aesthetic requirements related to the structure. With that said, there's this one section of the zoning ordinance that says that any dwelling unit shall have basically siding of various types to make sure it's again, not a trailer. So that will likely apply, but any more than that's probably not.
Okay.
At this point, it's not expected. Council could say otherwise.
Okay.
So again, taking a shipping container, putting on a slab, could you meet building code? Possibly, but you'd probably have to clad it with something based on this appearance of a dwelling
Yeah.
standard we have.
Go ahead.
And then one more comment, I guess I was just thinking was, I know we just revisited the home occupations code not too long ago. But if this ADU approval is going to be to try to encourage population density, I'm wondering if there will be any requirements or exclusions. Could somebody basically build an ADU in the back to house their business and keep it separate, kind of a she shed type thing, or?
So the home occupation standards do talk about use of the primary dwelling and accessory buildings already. So we will just apply those requirements.
Okay.
I think you hit on a thing that is probably of interest to as many people that want to do this as people that are trying to create a dwelling. Many people are thinking about how do I make this as extra habitable space for my enjoyment, not necessarily a dwelling unit. The direction we're going would enable that to occur, whether you're truly making it a new dwelling unit or not. That seems to be the path we're on, because right now you can't create habitable space for any purpose in the rear yard unless it's a pool house. So not all of these will be dwellings. They might just be extra space for people that want extra space.
I'm curious about the 25% maximum for accessory buildings. Was there any consideration given to that? And how much does that limit lots where you could build an accessory dwelling unit practically?
It will be an impediment, but it's also part of the accessory structure code today. So we were taking the existing accessory structure code and applying it pretty much as a blanket to accessory dwelling units. So we didn't deviate from that.
Yeah, I think if we take a step back on what I believe council's philosophy here was, we're not trying to treat them any more special than anything else. We want to treat them the same as other structures. We weren't charged with how do you make this happen in all situations on all properties. We were charged with what's a set of rules that will generally allow this to occur in a compatible manner. And that's why we've been based on our current standards for the most part.
Okay.
Will there be, is going to, there'll be a restriction so it can't be turned into a business? Or I know there is some kind of zoning or something that prohibits businesses in a residential area?
And that is not true. So we have a home occupation ordinance. State law tells you what you can and can't do for permitting of home occupations. So we have limits on the square footage of a home and limits about how it can be done on a property, but an accessory building can be used for that. And then there's limits on the number of employees and other things that go with that. So you can't, so it has to be a home-based business, but yes, you can use an accessory building for it.
Okay, and then is there going to be some kind of code for blending it in with the primary residence? Not.
Other than the height limit, no. Right?
Right.
Yeah, just the height limit. You have a one-story house, you get a one-story accessory structure. You have a two-story house, you can go up to 2 stories. That's the only aesthetic control that's in this.
And most of these are going to not be visible from the street because they're in the rear yard or
We also have no designer requirements for your house in the first place. So it's kind of hard to now say this little structure has to be nicer than anything else that's on the block. When we
Well, I'm not saying nicer, just has to kind of blend in with the main building.
yeah, we don't have that expectation.
Sometimes I've seen some of the codes written as like of like materials to the principal structure. But again, that might exclude some of your artsy type ADUs that we may actually want.
so in the Old Town Historic District, there are standards for the historic buildings. And so
Okay.
there would be additional standards where they do have to meet some of the design criteria. So in that case, they will look nicer if they're built.
I get to play the devil's advocate now, which I enjoy doing. If you live within a quarter of a mile of a public transportation, you still have to have a parking place for them, for the ADU.
Correct.
Why?
Because that reduction is solely based on the data for affordable housing, which says they don't own cars. We don't have any data that says whether there's car ownership related to this or not. So if you want to recommend we should cut the parking requirement,
No.
go ahead and make
No, but this is
I'm waiting for it.
devil's
Waiting for
advocate
it.
talking.
Okay. Like we said, when you see the survey results, the parking question is
I'm sure it is.
number one, right?
Yes.
Number one question of if you really want to facilitate them, drop the parking requirement. If you want to tolerate them, keep a parking requirement. That's the comments we're getting.
A lot of cities that first implemented them start with something more restrictive. And then over time, when they find that they're not being built everywhere and that people are, that they haven't been a horrible thing, they end up making it a little bit more easier to build. And most often over time, some of these cities have dropped the parking requirement altogether because they are wanting to try to see more of these built. But given the concerns with parking in Ames, it's probably really important to start with requiring parking and And then over time, if there's a determination it's not needed, we have some data to back that up, maybe it'll be.
I do think that parking is a double-edged sword. I think, Matthew, you hit on it about the, didn't you talk about the permeable surface on the, so if we have a 60% in place, then you say you have to basically provide an additional parking space. And then when we revisited parking requirements previously, a non-conforming parking space, you can't put gravel over it anymore. You have to pave it. So you're adding permeable space to the lot, which is then going to go against your lot permeability requirements.
So gravel is already considered impervious, so it's only that net new
Okay.
area. So gravel is impervious in our eyes. It is not pervious area. So yeah,
Okay.
so a parking space is roughly 200 square feet. That's the
Okay.
magnitude of saying I got to add concrete to my lot in addition to the ADU. Now, getting to that space, maybe there's a little more that goes into it, but the parking space is 200 square feet, give or take.
And there has to be a pathway to the ADU also, right? A sidewalk.
Currently,
Yeah.
the regulations say that the ADU needs a sidewalk to the parking area.
Okay.
And that was along with parking, one of the comments, parking and sidewalk connection.
I think that where that starts to make less sense is when it's behind a house that has a 2-car garage and the parking is in front of the house and the unit's behind it and you're walking through a garage to get there. That's where it starts to probably fall down as an expectation. I think the diagrams kind of show that. Eloise made a diagram just to illustrate how that would work.
So in this case, it worked out great because I could show
If you have a door. in the
I'd
back
walk
of
through the garage.
So that's probably one that may or may not get changed because it, yeah. Any other questions right now? Again, there doesn't have to be any action tonight. This was really informational. If there was something that really stirred in your hearts about this and you wanted to make a formal recommendation to the commission, we can do that too.
The one thing I see is, what Julie and I kind of said, the aesthetics or blending in with the original main dwelling. You know, you don't want the pink polka dotted house, ADU unit in front of the,
Can't be in front. It'll always be behind.
it's back. Yes, I understand.
So I'll make my house polka dotted.
Yeah.
My ADU solid paint.
I've known people like that.
So I think you're right. So the duplex standards, totally opposite. We're not trying to allow them to happen everywhere unless they make sense in that neighborhood. And you have to do new construction. So there's not a lot of vacant lots in the city. It doesn't mean you can't tear something down and build a duplex, but it's really more geared towards design context than this. This is more about we're plunking it in the backyard. The homeowner is going to figure out what works for them. Really a totally different perspective. So
I don't think there's much really discussion on the duplex part of this.
it doesn't seem like it's going to happen very much because of the lack of vacant lots. But as soon as I say that, someone's going to demolish a 350 square foot house and build a duplex. So
With an ADU behind it.
nope, can't have an ADU with the duplex. It has to be single family only. So a 1-family dwelling is the only
I thought you
eligible.
counted the duplexes as single families.
They're called 2-family. Each unit is a single family unit, but it's a 2-family dwelling.
Okay.
That's our terminology. Zoning ordinances have lots of terminology. So anything else tonight for the commission on this? Okay. Again, I think council will move this forward in some fashion next week. So it'll take a little bit, but it could be as early as November before we're back with an actual ordinance with final standards.
All right. Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome.
Please.
Yeah. Eloise has been a trooper on this, putting
Yeah.
all this together, and
This is huge.
Coordinating all the
for Ames
outreach.
To do
Yep.
this. So that's really awesome. Thank you.
All right. Well, we can move on to commission comments next then. Any commission comments?
Just my standard one. I knew you count on it anymore.
I was just pointing at you.
What's going on next time?
I think right now we don't have anything. No, that's not true. There is a project that's trying to meet the next meeting for an integrated subdivision to build a commercial building. So that might make it to the agenda. Preliminary plat with a site plan.
Anything getting close on this downtown?
Got no updates.
Just still trying to get romantics.
Still what?
They're still trying to get romantics?
No, that has nothing to do with it.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Any staff comments?
Nope. Thanks for your time tonight. Thanks for investing in this and getting ready for when it comes back to you.
All right. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
We're adjourned.